Hello and welcome to another in our webinar series. Welcome to all the business leaders and owners on the call from around the UK. Welcome to our panel, Jerry Lawrence, one of our regional directors, Gareth Rooney and Andrew Sykes, two of our principals. Also, I'm particularly pleased to be joined by Aaron Baker, 13 years in the investment team at BGF, following stints in banking and accounting. Aaron has worked in non-exec director roles in various companies and sectors and different strategies. We know BGF very well. They're the UK's most active investor of growth capital in the mid-market. They've supported over 650 SMEs with £5 billion of investments. For those of you who don't know us, Freeman Clarke are the largest and most experienced team of fractional technology leaders. We work exclusively with mid-market businesses. We are entirely independent. Lots of our work is about growth and innovation, which is the subject for today's discussion. So we're going to talk for about an hour and finish hopefully at exactly 1:30 UK time. We've got some questions from the registration process already, and we'll come to those later. But in addition, feel free to put other questions into the Q&A box as we go, and I will try and feed those into our conversation. As you listen today, I would like to offer you stories from our clients, from BGF's clients about innovation and growth that you can hopefully relate to your own businesses. Particularly, I guess the question is, how could great technology leadership, great investment, strategy and execution capability move the dial for you? So let's move on to the first kind of quick discussion. And I was going to go around the room and ask, what does innovation mean to you? Let me start, Jerry. What does innovation mean to you?
Well, so classically, innovation is all about doing something new. I expect that will come up a few times. But I quite like the tack of that entrepreneurs are innovators. And so if you start a business, then you must have found at least one thing that you think you can do better, different, newer, faster, cheaper than somebody else was doing. And so you feel like you can do it and you go and do it.
Andy.
Yeah, so I agree with everything Jerry says. I mean, I think for me, innovation typically arises where you've got a big problem to solve, where you're looking to create value, and where you're looking to basically drive change in the organization and change in what the organization is able to deliver. So, you want it to be significant, you want it to be meaningful, you want it to be creating value, and practical. You've got to be able to measure, what the effect of that innovation is in ways that are meaningful. So.
Aaron?
Yeah, I think for me, innovation isn't just about new ideas or breakthrough technologies, which people often put it in that bucket. It's about creating better ways of delivering value. It's a willingness to challenge the norm, to approach problems within businesses differently, and just generally to continuously improve. But fundamentally, serving your customers better, both through existing ones, but importantly, when you bring that back to growth, that ability to do something better in the market to attract new customers.
Gareth?
For me, it's unlocking business potential growth through the application of maybe a new technology. So for me personally, being able to land in a new business, unfamiliar surroundings, and see something that no one else has seen, and then applying a solution to that, which is new, innovative, perhaps taking something that's worked in another sector and applying it to different surroundings.
Okay. Or kind of similar but different answers. I think one of the things when we had the prep call for this is that although we are talking about innovation and growth, that means many, many different things in different circumstances. So can we start, Jerry, by you trying to kind of peg out the territory and say, what do we mean? What are we talking about? What aren't we talking about?
Right. So so there's a couple of things to start with. So there's growth and there's innovation, and they're not necessarily the same thing. They're often very tightly linked. But growth can come without innovation, for example. So we've worked with companies who have needed to grow and who've grown really strongly, but not necessarily because they did something massively different or created a new product. So we worked with a logistics company that grew really strongly, and that was because they had really good relationships with people and grew the company in a traditional way. That still gave them growth pains and things that needed to happen in their business to allow the growth in the back end and to get better processes underway. but it wasn't it wasn't that innovation that drove that growth. However, there's other companies that we work with that where their growth has definitely been driven by an innovation, sometimes technology based, or sometimes even not. So we work with a car decal company who they've done all sorts of things to drive their growth through innovation. They've got a specific product that does sort of thermal reflection so that it's easier for vehicles to be tracked, emergency vehicles to be tracked using infrared cameras. So super interesting, and that's helped drive their growth. So it can happen both ways. And the other thing that I think that we need to talk about, and I think you mentioned it a little bit in the intro, Aaron, which is that not all growth has to be about some big radical change. It can also be this incremental innovation that can drive growth, and that's super important in a business too. So again, we've seen that many times with clients where sometimes they do big, really amazing things. So I'll peg one example, which is there's one company, for example, who sells safety equipment. We helped them, and they have got special software that tracks who did they who did they sell that equipment to, and what that did is that set them apart from other businesses, and so they're not necessarily the cheapest company, but they've got a really good retention rate, and by providing that extra service that the company would have to do for themselves otherwise, it's made them more sticky. And that was a really super interesting innovation that helped to drive their top line as well as save some money.
So it's a huge kind of variety of
Yeah.
different stories there. Aaron, is that consistent with your experience?
Yeah, I think it is. I think I sort of regarding that sort of transformational versus sort of evolutional. I think you do see transformational, growth and innovation. That is often a really good idea. And in which case, you back that horse and you give it everything it needs to succeed. We'll come on to it later, I think, around having an organization that sort of breeds the culture to support that.
Mm.
I think you also, when we talk about big transformation projects as well, it actually is because the culture's not been there to support enduring innovation. And actually, there's a lot of sort of catching back up to do. I think that, the best sort of long-term value driver, when we think about innovation, it's about creating value, continuously creating value over the years, is just building that culture where we are always looking to improve, and that is a organizational, it's like a stick of rock. It needs to run all the way through the business, that people are, supporting these ideas, supporting the direction of the company from the bottom up. And, fundamentally the business has got the systems in place to take advantage of all that intel from everywhere it touches, whether that be its staff or its customers or something. So I do think that holds true. If you can build that sort of culture, that ability to know that you are mechanizing, your culture, mechanizing your output to continue to march forward is definitely more sustainable, and it goes to value as well. You're a more valuable business for it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was going to say, so presumably from the point of view of an investor, the ability to innovate is a key factor in how you would value or how you would assess a business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. But then, I think we've all got the same sort of theme here in terms of the message. Innovation isn't what most people think. It's not having a R&D lab spitting out good ideas. It's a culture. You can be in a very traditional, very boring business, but still deliver exceptional growth. And it's having that culture to say, well, this is what we do. This is the market opportunity. How can we better do this all the time, testing that? And that's what allows you to grow, but it's also what allows you to build the moat around your competitors, again, which goes to value. But I think it builds on that as well, because you get that momentum in terms of the strength of the business and the direction it then goes. That also allows you more scope to experiment. So that does allow, because you're more stable, you can see your revenue better, your margins are probably better. And actually, as a leadership team, as a board, you can actually say, wow, we're a bit bigger now. We can put a bit of box of cash or a box of time or a box of people to one side, and see if there's any step change stuff as well. And that sort of opportunity, those sorts of businesses, regardless of sectors, are super interesting for the likes of us.
Gareth, Andy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think if just picking up on something that Aaron said, I mean, the sort of subtext of a lot of this for me is, are you innovating in areas that are meaningful for the business and actually going to help you grow the business, or are you innovating for innovation's sake? I think, where I've seen great success in terms of the business getting value out of innovation is where there's been a real strong alignment between clarity in what the business is trying to achieve, that clarity driving through the organization, and people being encouraged to use, whether it's technology or improving the business flows or looking at eliminating unnecessary process or whatever. But there's a real clarity around what you're trying to do. There's a real alignment across the organization, and people are innovating in the areas that are actually meaningful. And they can point back to, where that innovation has actually had a positive effect on the value for
Yeah.
the client.
I mean, I couldn't agree more, because the reality of mid-market or SME businesses is there is a limited amount of resource, there is a limited
Yeah.
amount of time, there are a limited number of experts, and you really have to be precise and focused about where your innovation is. But one of the things that I was reflecting on, someone once said to me, is that, promotions and promotional activity is important for this quarter, marketing activity is important for this year. But if you want to have a strong decade, then that's about innovation. And I sort of thought, yeah, you're right, because product service innovation, that's what actually creates the value at the core of the business.
I completely agree with that. I think some of that, Graham, if I could sort of wade in there as well, it's communication around the organisation to support that as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to expect an organisation to innovate not knowing where, to the point previously, where the direction is. The sales team, the marketing team are probably driven by more touch points to the website. You can do that if you cut your prices and drop your margins. That's the wrong kind of innovation. If you set the challenge of, we want more customers at a better margin doing something else, people, it's a harder problem to solve.
Right.
But you've got more, if there's clarity from the top to the whole organization, you've got more people thinking, all right, we know what we've got to achieve there.
Right. So that's a really interesting point then, isn't it? I suppose it relates to what Andrew was saying as well there, which is that if you're the boss and you're trying to make this happen, then what you're trying to do is point to the things that matter so that people can propose innovations along those channels, rather than say, well, it'd be nice to have, not supposed to put our umbrellas when we come in the morning. Well, that's fine, but that's not actually going to move the dial in terms of the business.
Absolutely.
So the leader's role there is to establish what are those points which define the value proposition of this business, and that's where we want to see innovation.
Absolutely, and get the team then to buy into them. That's a CEO's role, is to set that clarity and find that buy-in.
Okay, so that probably then gives us a nice segue into the next thing we were going to discuss, which is, how do you create the conditions to enable this? Do you want to talk a bit about your experience of that, Aaron?
Yeah, I think it's such a broad topic, and I've sat on numerous boards over the years, and it comes up in the better ones. It doesn't come up in the less highly functioning boards, but always an aspiration to get there. So I've tried to sort of bucket it into three buckets really, and I'll save the sort of the most important one till last. I think in terms of innovation, we've sort of alluded to it already. It's information, so it's information. Have leadership and the people that are setting the strategic direction of the company got the idea of the market trends and that sort of stuff, and where they want to go. That sets the direction of travel. And then the team below them, have you got the information then to go and act on those decisions, whether that be internal information, customer, external information, but certainly the interface of where those two things meet. So having the right information to make more informed decisions is super important. I think the warning signals in the modern world, however, is there's information everywhere, and it's making sure that we've got the right information, that we are not just focused on historic information, because without being rude, that's easy. We need to have information that is pointing forward and giving us indicators of what is to come. And I think all firms are guilty of this. We are not getting lost in reporting because we've got more information. If that means putting your foot on the ball for a month or two to say, we've got to find some, excuse me, I've lost my word. we've got to find the right amount of time to put in. We've got to find some time savings on a day-to-day basis. Let's get it set up properly first. Let's build the culture and the organisation to run this sort of model, and then we go from there. I think the second piece for me is decision making, and it's that ability to make quick decisions. That doesn't mean making reckless decisions. And if decisions do warrant time before they are made, for example, a big irreversible decision, pulling out of Germany or something. It's seriously large. Take the time, get the information, do the work. But day to day, for things that can be reversed, or are low costs from time and or money, that there might be a decent benefit if it takes, but we just don't know if it's going to take. That ability to just make some of these decisions very quickly, and learn from them quickly, I think is a really good skill to have, albeit with the checks and balances. There's a great case study from Adidas over the last 2 or 3 years, where they were struggling for probably for a decade in terms of their competitiveness with Nike and all that sort of stuff. The new CEO came in, I think about 2 years ago, and basically just removed 10 levels of authority to get new trends and new products signed off, so they could just get products to market quicker, see what stuck, and then built on that. And that's been a tremendous turnaround there. And I think it's a great example of in there innovating the leadership model, and the decision making model has really sort of driven their commercial success. And the last point of my three buckets is culture. And I think this is really where innovation happens in organizations. A lot of ideas, a lot of thoughts are going to be wrong and or not relevant, and it's scary. Particularly if you're not a shareholder, you're not a boss, you don't want to be told no or that you're wrong. But you need to build an environment where that is safe. People need psychological safety to challenge the norm and not be punished for it. And be rewarded for thinking, not necessarily the outcome. So setting that culture where that sort of thing is allowed and is encouraged. Obviously, whilst everyone is still doing their day job and everything that needs doing is done, I think is very important that that culture of curiosity and collaboration and experimentation is very good. And as I say, that can be in a very benign industry, but there are still ways of doing things better, and I think that's important. Again, you pick on a corporate example, Google would be a good one. Yes, they work a lot of hours in the week, and there's a lot of people and there's a lot of money, but they take 10 or 20% of their week is just blocked off every week to stare at a whiteboard and come up with new ideas, because they know that they've got to be innovative to stay ahead of the competition, because they're coming up so quickly.
So, three things I heard then: vision and information, rapid but not reckless decision making, and a culture which enables this.
I think that's right.
Jerry, Gareth, Andrew, what do you think?
I've got some another thing that I think is important, which is, well, first off, I've doubled down on the concept of innovate quick, do things quickly, iterate quickly. There's a really good book called Idea Flow, and that covers very clearly the research that says the single biggest factor for being successful at innovation is how many ideas that you actually iterate through. It's not about whether they're any good. In fact, most of them won't be any good. So you have to embrace that failure, not punish it, and just keep encouraging people to just keep trying, because you will come up with the right solutions in the end. But the other side of that, and culturally, is that it's also about bringing together the whole team of people from across the board that need to be involved. So if you are creating a process for a business, or if you're creating a new product, you don't just design it in isolation. You design it with the production engineers there as part of that team, and everyone's together. All of the latest sort of big successes in those kind of developments have been done that way. It's it's absolutely vital, because the best way to get people to work together is for them to sit together, work as a group, and just bounce off and solve the problems.
Well, one of the things which I think is interesting there about that, because I totally agree with you about that whole team approach, is that this isn't necessarily going to look very efficient. It's not necessarily going to look every day like great progress was made and great decisions were made. And actually, you've got to be tolerant of quite a lot of chaos. And that can be quite countercultural for a lot of entrepreneur-led businesses, for a lot of mid-market companies, which are typically very, very focused on doing the day job. And I think, Jerry, in one of the prep calls, you talked about a lot of our customers being optimized to deliver the daily bread. That's what they do. And not surprisingly, it's then quite difficult for them to make space from a time point of view, from a resource point of view, from a cultural point of view.
Yeah, aside from not trying enough things, it turns out the biggest barrier usually companies have with innovation is their existing client base. You obviously have to support that, and it's very easy to say, well, of course the clients must come first, but But if you are not able to separate that out and give enough energy and resource into the new stuff, then you just will never create the new stuff. And the new stuff, as we've said, doesn't have to be big, massive changes. Even the incremental changes need to keep happening. So yeah.
Gareth, Andrew, any thoughts?
Yeah, just going back to Aaron's decision making and culture points, they resonate really strongly with me. But when you take, for instance, the businesses I work with at Freeman Clarke, they're all very different. They're all at different levels of maturity, whether it comes to ELT decision making or the general culture within the business. So sometimes in our role, what we have to do is we have to move, not necessarily the technology, but one of those things forward in the business. And that can be quite challenging. Some of them, are in industries where, open culture of ideas and suggestions from the bottom, is not, a common thing. So it can be quite hard to instill that in that kind of environment.
Can I suggest two things? Because I agree with you completely to start with about the feedback from the bottom, so to speak. It's often relatively junior people that know what's really going on. And having a culture within which it's okay for them to say things which might be kind of perceived as slightly annoying or slightly difficult. But then the other thing I was going to say, which I don't think any of us has mentioned so far, is customer feedback. I read recently that Gillette still do they still get people to shave in front of two-way mirrors all the time. You would have thought that they know how people shave, but they still do this because they're still interested to see what's going on. And I think there is a real danger. And, I dare say I speak for myself here to some extent. Will talk about our customers as if I know them well. Well, how much time am I actually spending out there learning and listening?
Yeah. I completely agree with that. It's something that certainly a lot of the boards I work on, fundamentally, particularly if you're talking about growth, the easiest way to sell something is to sell it to somebody that said they want it, and you get that sort of feedback by speaking to the market.
Yeah. In terms of the other thing which I was thinking about before this was about control of budgets, and I guess this relates to Aaron's point about rapid decision making. We often see in mid-market or SME businesses, the budgets are controlled at quite a high level by a pretty small number of people. Now that can have a bit of a strangling effect, but equally well, there's a reality which is that the resources are limited, and there needs to be control of this. Have any of you got examples of where they've seen this done well, where they've seen effective delegation of authority over budgets, which enables expenditure without basically letting the lunatics take over the asylum?
Yeah.
As an accountant, do you want me to have a go?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think it's as well as sort of innovation and that ability to invest, and if nothing else, it's going to cost time to sort of to be innovative. But fundamentally, if you pin it back to growth, you never, particularly if you're a founder-owned business, and still on your growth journey, you're just not going to be able to grow full stop without being able to delegate budgets and decision making and all that sort of stuff. I think the whole thing comes together, whether it's investing the time and delegating the time, delegating the decision making, delegating the budget. It has to happen. If you're nervous, start small. If you don't trust the team, start small. There's no reason you can't start that process, but you're going to need to go through that curve at some point anyway. So you might as well start getting the benefits as early as you can in the career, in the journey.
Yeah, so in terms of that starting small, I think one thing which I've seen work very effectively is that investment decisions are then carved into tranches. So, and at each point there needs to be some visible outcome. Like like an external investment, if you're making an internal investment, the total cost might be, we think it's going to be 100 grand, but you're not going to make that spend decision now. What you'll make is a spend decision now for the first 10,000 to get to place X, and you need to see that. You need to see the reality of show it's working, and then you'll authorize the next 20,000, and then you'll authorize the next 30,000, and eventually, but at any point, the risk you took is manageable, rather than the boss's feeling, well, this is a 100 grand decision. It isn't actually. This is a 10 grand decision to start with.
I think that's right, and I think you pin that back, because that's from the pound coins perspective as well. You pin back that to the strategic initiatives as well. Particularly if you are at the forefront of change and transformational change as well. It's very likely you start that journey and the goalposts change on the way through as well. So as well as having the financial check-ins, it's actually those strategic check-ins to say, well, actually, do we need to adjust the course slightly in terms of what we're doing here? Is the information we're getting right to to check to back up those decisions to where we're going as well. So I think the whole thing comes together, but it does imply that you do need to do this, and fundamentally more brains and more responsibility and more accountability is always going to be a good thing.
Is there another side to this coin, which is where we've seen forces that strangle innovation, and where we've seen organizations where there are cultural or management barriers or whatever, and what's the nature of those? Is that a useful thing to talk about?
I'd say so. I mean, I think firstly, I echo pretty much everything that Aaron was saying. I think if you are bringing the decision makers into the process, and to your point, Graham, almost making them part of the lunacy, yeah, but they've got the opportunity. You've got the right stakeholders at the right point in the decision making process, and your decision making is agile, or whether it's 10 grand or 100 grand or whatever. You're happy that we've got the right people involved early enough in the process to say, let's go do that or let's not. Yeah. And I think, we've touched on this in maybe some of the other, sort of previous discussions. There is an awful lot of politics associated with technology, what you implement, who implements it, how does it reflect the personalities or the competition within, certain levels of the organization, all the rest of it. And sometimes that can, I know of examples in the financial services sector where initiatives have been killed because they did not suit the politics of some of the other senior players who were nominally meant to be supporting the thing, but in reality had a completely different agenda. So you're absolutely right. There are cases where everyone should be doing the right thing, but people have their own agendas, and it can be used as a roadblock.
Yeah, and when there's money involved, it's often really hard on the politics. I mean, if you look at the big company examples, where can you imagine how much pressure there has been on companies like Apple and Google to essentially do share buybacks or give dividends out instead, rather than sitting on a huge pile of cash. So up until 2 years ago, that seemed like, well, why would you have billions and billions of dollars in cash? And now suddenly they're all racing to spend it. And it's a good job they've got those, because they're spending it on big AI data centers and initiatives. And if they hadn't had the cash, they just wouldn't be able to do anything. But it takes a lot of management strength and ownership, the strength of ownership to deal with that. And fundamentally, that means that as a business owner, you need to think about, well, are you better off investing in yourself and your own business? Or should you just put the money in an index fund? That's essentially what you're competing against. And I think a lot of times you can do much better by spending the money yourself and making a product, making a service, doing something, because that's how business works.
Mm. We see it a lot over the years as well. The sort of when we're getting to know businesses before we invest in them, and we meet hundreds and hundreds more businesses than any investment that we make as well. When we sort of try to understand things, and we're understanding the thinking process behind business as well, and we're asking why. And sort of one of the scariest comments we hear, because we're interested in growth and innovation, do come together, is we've always done it that way. And I think that sort of habit is dangerous. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong way, but are you frequently enough sitting back and challenging that it is the correct way? That doesn't necessarily mean to say that the old way is wrong, but it's that, are you always testing things? And that's, again, I think you made the point, Graham, as a bare minimum, that's speaking to your customers and asking where you could be better. What else would they buy off you? What would a great version of us look like? Those sorts of things are really powerful and can really drive, good innovation and ideas through an organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always done it this way. I agree with you. That is the enemy of innovation, is everything is fine around here. We're coping perfectly fine, thank you. That's the enemy of innovation. And I guess the other side of that is that kind of what's the term? Management collusion. Is that the term where the boss of another department can see this, but they don't want to tread on that person's toes. They don't want to raise this issue around the leadership table because then someone might say something about how the fact that their department's not operating as well as it should do. And so there's this kind of collusion, non-aggression pact between different managers, and everyone allows this idea to persist that everything's okay around here. And
Yeah.
that's the enemy of innovation, the enemy of growth.
And that's back to that culture piece I was talking about, building that psychological safety. Whether
Yes.
it's at the bottom or at the top, you've got to
Yeah.
build an environment. And there are ways to do it, and there are
Yeah.
people out there that can help you do it, but you've got to build. And there's no point having 150 people and 150 different views on problems if you're not going to use them. If you're going to have one idea and 149 yes men or women, what's the point?
So I know, yeah, so I agree. I know we've got to move on, but can we just linger on this for a second? Because there's a really interesting point here, which is we often talk about the fact that it's got to be okay to fail. Okay. But how many organizations is it really okay to fail? I mean, let's be honest, how many of us have really worked in an organization where the boss says, yeah, fine, it went wrong. Who cares? How do you actually create that culture?
Well, it's from my experience, it came right from the top. I mean, right in the early days of the internet, I ran the tech team for Demon Internet, and we were innovating things all the time, and not everything worked, but a lot of it did, and because it did, we were successful. It required that boss to be the one that led that in terms of, well, yeah, it's okay, just give it a go. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. You can't. Nobody else can do that because you can't. Because if I just do it on my own, I'll lose my job, right?
Yeah.
That's it. So
well, if you decided it was okay for you to
yes,
fail, Jerry,
that's
okay.
right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Listen.
I
So
love
let's
that.
so go on.
So I was just going to say, I've always loved those adverts which say, "Oh yeah, we reward risk takers," and
Yeah.
we
Quite.
all know that sometimes that's true, but more often than not, the reward is being shown to the door. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we reward lucky risk takers. That's the so. So we were going to talk now for a few minutes about transformation versus evolution versus quick wins and these competing ideas for what innovation and growth should look like.
Yeah.
Aaron.
Yeah, I think the easy one's quick wins. If they are there, and if you've got the right sort of information, they're going to pay back. You just have to do them. That is just if you get really good at sort of leading businesses as well, hopefully you've got a culture where this sort of stuff just gets done. And it's a FYI up the chain. FYI, I did this. Here's the result. That sort of culture is fantastic. For me, sort of really good innovative companies, it's evolution. It's just constantly testing the norms. As I say, you might be in sectors, tech would be a great example, where there are step shifts in technology. You do need to adjust very quickly. Maybe, we're seeing parts of it in SaaS businesses already sort of rip up the book because things are going to be different in 2 years. So I think you've always got to be accepting to the fact that you may need to go through a transformational shift if something happens that you've missed or the markets move very quickly. But an underlying culture of how can we be better is just the right sort of thing. It drives the right sort of thinking. It drives incremental change. And that allows you to make longer term decisions as well.
So maybe what you're saying there is that transformational change is only necessary when you fail to evolve.
When you fail to evolve, or something out of your control has
Yeah,
evolved more quickly.
Maybe that was the way to look at it. Gareth, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, just from a quick win side of things. Yeah, I'm all for them. However, they need to be part of the technology strategy as a whole. Because I've seen in a few occasions where, people have clamored and grabbed for quick wins. And, off the back of it, we've got a ton of technical debt, or we've been painted into a corner. And it's been negative value as a result. So I think, yes, for the quick wins, but they need to be pegged against the technology strategy for me.
So you used the word technical debt there, which is the term we'll use frequently. But I think that's a very interesting point in relation to quick wins. Can you just elaborate a bit more about that for bosses out there who don't use the term and don't really understand why we're connecting that with a quick win?
Yeah, so I've seen this where non-technology leaders have been making technology decisions just based on limited advice. And what might appear good on a slide deck, might not give you value, 1, 2, 3 years down the road. So it's important to make sure that when decisions about technology are being made, somebody who is capable and qualified and competent is in that room as well, to guide those decisions.
And of course, I've got to say, that's what Freeman Clarke's all about. Um,
Can I go in there, Graham? Because I think it builds on that
yeah,
something
go
we
on.
mentioned earlier, but I think technical debt and in terms of the roadmap of the business, it comes back to having that sort of clarity of thought about where you want to be as well. That North Star that says, in 3 years, we want to look like this. We know we're probably not going to. And we also know in a year's time, we're probably going to move that North Star because things will have changed. But what it does, whether it's short-term, short-term quick wins in particular would be great to say, wow, if it's definitely going to be accretive and it lines up with our objectives, both at a divisional level, at a corporate strategic level, again, you can sort of you can delegate that authority that says, well, if you're staying in these tram lines that get us there in 3 years, carry on. We
Yeah, so
back
quick
you.
wins, as you say, they're just an FYI because they really don't need to have, or if business leaders need to intervene to deliver quick wins, something's wrong. Why are
Correct.
people not just quickly making those wins?
And I think it's often because they don't know where the corporate's going. There's the
Okay,
communication isn't there that says
okay.
this is where we're heading.
Right, interesting. Jerry.
Well, I think everything has its place, of course. So you can do all of those things. And I think you have to have an attitude of, well, nothing's off the table. You should always question whether you can simplify things, or whether you can delete things and do things better. But I'm also a big advocate of every now and then. I think it's super important to sit around with the team, with a group of people, and kind of noodle around on the prospect of, well, what could we do that's completely different? Because occasionally you just have to try to come up with some radical ideas, because otherwise they won't happen. And I mean, it's all very well just doing incremental, and that's great, but the big things come from big thinking, and so you have to give yourself a bit of space. Go for a walk. I often do with the people. Take them out for a walk in the countryside and think about it somewhere else, and then you surprise yourself. You sometimes come up with some amazing things that can then turn into amazing products and services.
Interesting. No, you're right. Andrew?
Yeah, again, agree with pretty much everything that's just been said. I mean, I think the thing for me, sometimes you are, though, embarking on a program which might be taking 18 months, 24 months, whatever, maybe longer to actually deliver in its entirety. I'm a big believer in trying to identify as many interim milestones where you can demonstrate, if you like, a quick win. But if you're talking about anything more than really even a few weeks now, probably, but certainly a few months, you need to be able to build confidence. You need to be able to build trust that you're going to be able to deliver this, and that people are actually going to realise some benefit that they expect to for the business and for clients. So I think Jerry might have said this is a balance. You want to be able to say, well, we're absolutely focused on the big strategic thing, but we can actually identify and break it down into some interim milestones that give people that confidence and demonstrate we're on track. And actually, do you know what, guys, this might actually work.
So in a way, the best kind of revolutions are just an accretion of evolutions, because transformation is, as we know, extremely risky. And I remember sitting opposite a chief exec who said to me, if this goes wrong, it will traumatize my business for the next 3 years. And he's absolutely right. The damage that can be done by a transformation project that misfires is potentially very, very significant.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we were going to do now is to try to bring this down to earth a bit and look at some specific examples of companies that we've worked in. And what I'd like to, if we can, is focus on what the bosses did in order to enable this, in order to encourage it, in order to facilitate it. So, Gareth, can you start with Neom, who are a strong household name and a great client of ours that you work closely with? Do you want to talk a bit about them?
Yeah, sure. So, what's your first bit first? What the boss did, they engaged us basically, and that was the main thing to be honest, from their point of view. Fundamentally, when we landed, were experiencing heavy growing pains. I think they've more than doubled for the last couple of years. They featured in one of the Sunday Times fastest 100 growing lists. And they were having big issues around literally just being able to get orders out the door. Their web channels, their sales channels like Amazon and all that were struggling to feed into their main systems. Their retail branches, none of the orders were passing into the back end system. So we identified, the thing that's stopping this organization growing, being able to reach its full potential was around integration. So bringing all those endpoints and systems together. All the endpoints and systems that they picked, there were solid choices, there were solid systems. It was just bringing them all together. So what we did as part of that engagement is, go out to the market and, put an enterprise level integration platform into that business, essentially to stitch up all of the front end web system to the ERP, to the EPOS system, and even now to all like Amazon and all the EDIs, because previously people were cross keying things. It was taking 10 days or so for orders to, leave, the dispatch facility. So basically, we when we got to our peak periods, we were hitting bottlenecks. I think Black Friday, think Christmas, and our service was suffering. So what we did by implementing this and tying everything together was basically take out all of that manual intervention, take out the time delay, take out the errors, and allow the business essentially to grow, not held back by technology, but supported by technology. So that was one of the key things that we did to allow that business to grow.
So there was pent up growth, and this was about enabling it. And I think we often see situations where people come to us because their business is starting to fall over, as you say. They are failing to see the economies of scale that they would expect to see, or because their business is becoming dominated by issues rather than dominated by opportunities. But big decisions, though, to put in a new generation of systems, presumably.
Yeah, it was. And, after we did the integration piece, then we started to rationalize a few of the systems down and, we went with a better EPOS solution. And, it's a cleaner, more efficient technology stack. And as a result, any new innovations in like AI or any new things that come to market, we can kind of jump on a little bit quicker than we did, a couple of years ago. So big decision, big investment, a lot of hard work, but we reap the rewards as a result.
Jerry, we see this a lot, I think, don't we?
Yeah. It's absolutely. I mean, you just have to. I feel like our role is often to put arms around this, so that just to make it go right, and make this, because sometimes some of the decisions are quite hard, and so the important thing is to have find somebody who can help guide that and really make it a success. Yeah.
So, Aaron, I'm assuming that in many cases, your investments, the first year of that investment, will be about these kinds of business upgrades, for want of a better term.
Yeah, often. I think obviously as a minority investor, it's not just our agenda. However, the experience that we've got in terms of what is scalable, what works, etc., is hard to argue with. So yeah, invariably, sort of first 12, 18 months is fixing occasionally what needs fixing, but it's definitely enabling the business for growth going forward. An example I was going to talk about, and I guess probably would have been a lot easier to have had Freeman Clarke back involved in the day, but we backed a business in the waste management sector, and actually as part of the commercial innovation program was to provide more services. The industry, everybody, JLR just wants to send all their waste to one person. In the background, that's not how it works. But fundamentally, the more offerings that you've got, the more relevant you are to big customers. So the business has done a number of acquisitions over the few years and was driving some synergies, certainly at the top line. but wasn't really driving much through the gross margin line. And it was just because of the lack of visibility of numbers within the organization. Effectively, you're getting paid to take some waste, and you've got to pay somebody once it's processed to take it back off you. And the profit's the bit in the middle. And the two halves, there was just a massive, and that's traded spot, that's traded on a daily or weekly prices. And the two halves of the businesses were trying their hardest, but just weren't talking to each other effectively. So we knew it was a reporting and data problem, but just couldn't get to it. The business was growing quickly. We knew we needed a massive upgrade. We started the SAP upgrade process. We lost the debate with the CEO about bringing somebody to oversee that, and it was handled internally, and it just took a while. But we got there eventually, and the reason we actually got there eventually was COVID. So COVID actually sort of gave us a bit of a lull period where actually it was like, oh, crikey, we can get our arms around this and sort of drive it through, which they did very well once they'd had a bit of bandwidth. And at that point, the business was probably a 40 million turnover business, and it drove somewhere between 1 and 1.5% of gross margin. So, £500,000 of profit just by being able to better price it, because you could see it all. And it was kind of like, it's great that it got done and all that kind of stuff. But you sort of look back and it's like, probably should have been a bit braver and thrown a bit more resource at that, because we knew it was relevant. But obviously the knock-on consequences are great as well, because actually from a competitive point of view, when you're facing to new customers, you've got better decisions, you can better price, there's less volatility because the information's live all the time, etc. as well. So it's a better experience, for everybody going forward. So bit of an example of sort of, definitely where it's paid off, albeit from a learnings point of view, that ability to sort of get the right people in to support that journey, and to execute it efficiently as well.
I know it's not really what we're talking about. One of the things I'm interested in there is the timing issue and the fact that they had this stroke of, let's call it luck, which is that they had the top came off their business, so that they had a bit more bandwidth, I guess, to execute this. Because Gareth, I'm sure the problem you're experiencing is that a lot of companies come to us when they're growing at tremendous rates, or they're very short of internal resources, and that's exactly the point that they're trying to execute a major internal upgrade. It's a real problem. There's no one available with time to do these things, and these things are very time consuming. It's always an issue. Gareth, I assume this is a major issue for Neil.
Yeah, it was, and to be fair, that was a year or two ago now, and we've on to the where we're really adding value and groovy things with AI, and taking advances of what's in ERP these days. So yes,
they got past that.
Yeah.
Andrew, you were going to talk a bit about a company that you worked with.
Yeah, so manufacturing space. So company, I will name them because I'm very proud of what we did there. Lineview basically produce systems that allow big manufacturers like Coca-Cola or Britvic or Danone or whatever to monitor their production lines. And their product, has been really the market leader, I think, in terms of functionality and the value it can add for quite a few years. But it was an on-prem product. It was starting to look a little bit dated, and with any on-prem installation across hundreds of sites, it's quite hard to get the latest functionality out there. I think it touches on then some of the things that you said. Well, what can a CEO or founder do to really enable transformation, to enable innovation? I think in this case it was very much three things really: clarity, ambition, and engagement. And what I mean by that really is, I came in to absolutely help provide that clarity of, right, we're getting this thing onto the cloud. We know that is the right platform for the future. And I think, Aaron, you might have touched on this idea of, you're doing this for the next decade. This is the next step change in the product in terms of its platform, its functionality, its UI. They will start to, look actively and incorporate elements of AI. But I think it's also a lesson that not all innovation is AI. It's very much dominating conversations at the moment about what innovation actually means. But in this case, it was more looking at some of the fundamentals of the application and the business processes it was supporting in particular. And that ability to innovate from a different sector. So coming from financial services, where there are tools out there like Flowable or whatever, which are very well established in terms of business process and workflow modeling, but not really used in a manufacturing context, even though you look at a manufacturing context and a lot of it is around standardization of business process. Yeah. And being able to rapidly implement business process or adapt business process. So part of the innovation we did there was actually incorporating some of those tools into the core product, as well as looking at what AI could do, but to really give that step change to, the ability for the company to react to what their clients were trying to do to standardize their processes, what their clients were trying to do to transform their own businesses and get much more control over it and more repeatability into it. So for me, that clarity of purpose drove all the way through, from the CEO and founder down, the ambition to say we are going to change the whole product. We're going to change how it's platformed, the tool set that underlines it, and then the engagement really throughout that whole process. And we've talked about bringing the right people down to make the decisions where they're needed. And again, the CEO and founder were excellent at doing that, and the team were able to get pretty much instantaneous decisions on, do we do that or do we do that?
So can you just elaborate on
agility
that
in the decision making was huge.
a little bit? How did that really happen? How were the leadership really able to be available and engaged in that way? What did that look like?
Time, that commitment to make the time, that commitment to actually work closely with the team to set priorities, to give that, you know, almost certainly day by day, if not minute by minute at times, engagement. Say, look, we need a steer on this. We can't afford either the time or the money to drift off. And it was it was, in some respects pushing against an open door to say that's the level of engagement we need. But having stakeholders that are able to provide that or are comfortable to delegate that to the actual people that are closest to the problem. And again, I'm not sure who touched on this. When we go into firms, a lot of the time the people in the room already know the solution. Yeah, that they just need someone to give them the framework to surface that and articulate why that is the right way to go. And I think that's a big part of what we do. And then if you've got the decision makers actively, and this is really important, they're actively just making themselves available. They don't necessarily know what they're going to have to commit to on any given day. They don't necessarily know the decisions they need to make on a given day, but they're making themselves available to make those decisions. And that I think is a real enabler.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting, Aaron, how we're kind of coming back to your vision, information, rapid decision making, and culture that you said right at the beginning. This is kind of really showing itself in these stories.
Yeah.
Jerry, finally, you were going to talk about something.
Yeah, so we work with another client, No Letting Go, who are leaders in the inventory management market in for property letting, and the the technology that they've put in place has been quite transformational because, of course, letting inventory management used to be just done with a notebook and a pencil, and so they implemented a system where, of course, you can do it with software, and so that's developed over many years now and has got more sophisticated over the time. And the reason this has happened is because of that exactly the visionary leadership. They have a chief exec who knows what good looks like and has in his mind what good would look like and is always open to new ideas and always open to stretching, the art of the possible because many people, including some of the people in the team, uh, often get sucked into the what's in front of them, solving the immediate problem that's right there, rather than stepping back and seeing if there's a wider problem to be fixed or a bigger opportunity to be had. And so having that person who is continuously bringing the team back to that vision of like, well, what if we could do this? What if we could do that? And then that, and those challenges are often taken up by the people. And the other factor, of course, is then attract good people into the team, put proper experts in place to help deliver it. Because often a couple of really amazing people can, if you just let them at it, will just run and do amazing things. So that's another factor. Provide the vision and then find some decent people who can actually be on your team and make it happen for you.
Mm. Yeah, interesting. I'm pleased that you gave that example at the end, kind of business services, because we've talked a lot about manufacturing and sort of hard product environments. But actually, an awful lot of the innovation we provide is in business services, professional services, consulting businesses, all this kind of thing. Am I right that a lot of the time that's about data? That's about understanding client base. That's about understanding where the money is. That's about understanding where the marketing opportunities are, and so on and so on. It's more about insight is often where that kind of innovation comes from. Would you say, Jerry?
A lot, yeah, a lot, particularly more so now, even because of AI, because data insights are now much easier than they used to be. With large volumes of data now, you can really dig into it. So, yeah, that's absolutely the case.
I've got a great example here, Jerry. For this is from 10 years ago, so without the level of data that we've got nowadays, but a surveying business, and
Yeah,
its surveyors averaged 7 surveys per day.
yeah.
And the new CEO came in and swapped their hard boots from laces to slip-on riggers, and they fitted in 8 surveys per day.
Brilliant,
Innovation,
Brilliant.
but it's
brilliant. But
it's
it
marginal
worked.
improvements all
Yes.
everywhere. Yeah.
No, and I mean I've seen some amazing things that done with particularly even bespoke software systems. There is a real good place for building bespoke systems where it's going to be of benefit. There's a company that does telegraph pole uh, inspection and monitoring, and they implemented a mobile app for their people, and that of course they could put all the geolocations of where all the poles are, which made it easier for them to find them. So that's an immediate win. But even more importantly, they put extra, all the note taking could then be on the mobile. It can even take measurements, so it can measure the angle. A phone can measure an angle of how it is, and all of this data could be captured immediately. And then, of course, they decided that they could do lone worker protection by press a button on the phone if you're about to shinny up the pole, and if it detects a fall, it will then call the emergency services, or indeed if it just loses connection, then the base camp will say, "Hang on a sec, I've lost connection with my worker in the field," and the impact of that to the business was rather than send 2 people in a van, they were able to only send 1 person in a van, and that you can imagine massively transformational to the
Yeah.
business.
There's this particular question that I wanted to come to, which is Nikki, who is managing director of a manufacturing company, Rebecca's Manufacturing. How do you create a great working environment where change and growth are normal and flows from a motivated workforce? Who's got a simple answer to that?
You have to show as a leader that you're open to it. You have to act on ideas, and that sometimes that means being honest and just saying that I don't think that's right, or go and back it up. You set the bar, set the level of expectation that you expect people to bring from an informed point of view, but you've got to act on it, because otherwise people give up pretty quickly if they think that the culture isn't going to accept change.
Yeah.
If you want to look interested, you've got to be interested. If you want to look
Mm.
supported, you've actually got to be supported. There's
Yeah.
probably no way around that. Um, so I think accessing ideas from across the workforce is the challenge here, isn't it? Because it's fine for the kind of your white collar staff who are sitting at laptops. But in a manufacturing environment where you've also got people out and about in the workshop who are not necessarily used to having their ideas listened to, this can be quite a cultural challenge, can't it?
Mm.
I think it's also transformational when they do see some of their ideas being taken on board. Yeah. So you talk about, as you say, people on the actual shop floor, but if you're able to actually get out and talk to those people and take some of that feedback and reflect it back in the product, and they see that, that is part of the transformation for them.
Mm.
That's a cultural transformation where, to the point you were making, the point that Aaron's making, you're not just talking about it, you're actually taking that feedback and doing
See,
it. So,
I have to say, all of these webinars we do always end up coming back to culture and saying, well, that's really the start and the end of these whole. So, Jerry, can you take 30 seconds, please,
Yeah.
to just tell people how we go about providing a way forward on innovation and growth?
Yeah, we have a specific assessment on growth that we can carry out where we look at the strategic strengths and capabilities of an organization. We also look at the systems and processes that might become growth blockers. And then we facilitate brainstorm for opportunities and what you walk away with and actionable initiatives or enable that we could enable or stimulate the growth in the business. So come and have a chat and we'll take you through that.
We will be in touch with everyone who's attended the event and everyone who's registered but couldn't make it. Thank you all very much indeed.